What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. We've got a good one today. So we're going over my top 5 Dynasty rookie picks. Of course, the draft is still months away and things are going to change when that takes place. But I thought it'd be fun to just take a look, see what things are looking like right now for the top 5. If you want to see the rest of my rookie rankings, or really any ranking for that matter, then any package on the website right now is 15% off through the end of April. Just use promo code FFA when signing up. It's thefantasyfootballadvice.com. So let's get things started off with my 101 this season, and that's Ja'Marr Chase. Now, landing spot is going to be key here, as it is with everyone, but I would say among all the players we're going to talk about today, and really any rookie, I would say that Chase matters the least. Okay, so with a lot of the running backs, tight ends, wide receiver, we're like, yeah, they're going to be great, but I want to see where they go, and especially not only like how early they go, but to what team. You know, that's how much opportunity they're going to have to start. I think with Chase, and kind of why I have him at 1 is I don't care as much. I think he's going to be incredible on pretty much any team that's going to take him. And let's be honest, a team that's going to take Ja'Marr Chase is going to have to do it in the early first round, and they're not going to take him if they don't need to use him. So the overwhelmingly likely outcome here is that Ja'Marr Chase goes to a team that's going to feature him right away. The thought right now around the industry is that he's probably not going to last past the Eagles pick at 6th overall, which right there should give you some sort of indication as to just how valuable he is. And from everything that I've seen, it's seeming like if the Dolphins don't take him at 3, then the Eagles are going to take him at 6. And honestly, that would be just like the perfect landing spot for him and just an incredible pick for them to make. Jackson is a free agent. They got Alshon being released probably when the new year starts. And so the Eagles' top 3 receivers are Rager, their first round pick last season, and we'll talk about later, J. Jaws, and Ward. There's a 0% chance they go into week 1 with that. So if they don't take Chase, they're going to take someone. If they don't take someone, they're going to have to find someone in free agency. And when we look at Chase, like I said, he's a fantastic pick for them to make. I love Jalen Reagor, and I think he's a very talented wide receiver. And I think that for what this offense needs, he's a very, very important piece. But he is not a number 1. I thought that maybe there was a chance he could be last season, but after watching him for a year, he's not a guy that you want to throw out there, out wide, and just be like, okay, the offense is running through Jalen Reagor. No. They need another just established wide receiver that's just an elite talent on the outside that can take number 1 corners and that can be used on just a number of different routes, and to use Reagor more down the field, use him more on screen passes, and not be taken over by the team's number 1 corner. Like, Reagor is just not a 1. He's still a fantastic wide receiver, but he's much better in the role as a number 2. Ja'Marr Chase is pretty clearly an alpha, and he's someone that you can feature your offense around and just pepper him with as many targets as possible. And if they want Jalen Hurts to succeed, which they obviously do, then you got to give him a chance, right? Because their current wide receiver core, he doesn't have a chance at succeeding. Maybe he can do okay, he can get them some wins, but if you've got the wide receivers I've listed off as your 1, 2, 3, you're not going anywhere. Right? And so I'm pretty convinced that they will select him at 6 if he's available. And like I said, the only way he's not going to be is if the Dolphins take him at 3. But realistically, that would be fine too. So if you're sitting there like, well, okay, you're saying it'd be a great landing spot on the Eagles, but what if he doesn't go to the Eagles? Well, that's what I talked about. It's like I don't care as much about the landing spot because let's say the Dolphins take him at 3, then that's going to be fine. Like, I'd prefer the Eagles, but Chase is talented enough to be an instant factor on most teams. He's an unbelievable route runner. He's got the size to line up anywhere on the field, and he can play in the slot. And his production in 2019 was just insane because remember, he opted out of this last season, but in 2019 he posted 84 receptions, 1,780 yards, and 20 touchdowns, which was on par with or better than the numbers that Justin Jefferson was posting. You know, we don't have like combine numbers yet. It's going to be a little bit of a weird year. It's a virtual combine. I'm not 100% sure how that's going to work out, you know, like how accurate the numbers are going to be, but he would have to just bomb, to just drop a ton in value. But there's really just nothing negative you can say about this kid. I mean, he's got the early breakout age. He's got the college production. The film grinders, if you want to know what they think, they love this kid. He's going to have that elite draft capital. And there's also the age component. You know, if you're looking at Dynasty, you want these guys long term. He's 2 years younger than Harris. He's over a year younger than Etienne and Smith. You know, I can't promise he's going to be a wide receiver 1 in fantasy in year 1. It's a lot to ask right away. You know, not everyone is Justin Jefferson, but he's going to be at some point. And in Dynasty, you're probably going to have like 7 to 8 years of elite production. So like, I get it if you really want one of the running backs over him, but Chase is such a safe pick, and you're not sacrificing upside by taking that safety. So I really think he's the 101 because like, he's not going to bust, and he's got just as much, if not more upside than anyone else you can take. At 2, we have Najee Harris, which of course means that he is my top running back off the board. I always feel just like weird trying to sell you guys elite players, right? Like if we go over a video where I'm talking about my top 10 players in fantasy football, it's like, I feel odd being like, yeah, you know, Christian McCaffrey is like really, really good. Like I feel odd in even these videos for Dynasty trying to sell you guys that Najee Harris is good because like obviously he's good. He was a starting running back for a national championship team, and he's probably going to be a first rounder. I'm thinking that's where he's going to go, but if not, early second round. Everyone knows he's talented. But for those of you who have not seen him play, a brief clip notes is he's just going to explode through holes. He's got fantastic spin moves, which to me means he's going to break tackles at the pro level. Like if we're watching his film and he's not bursting through holes, he's breaking tackles in college, but it's like, you know, college defenders aren't that great. He looks like a kind of player who's going to break tackles at the pro level. He is a capable receiver. He is not as good as Etienne. I want to make that clear, and that's going to be clear in this video. That's the biggest difference between Harris and Etienne. Etienne is a superior receiving back to Harris, but Harris is fine. He's not a complete zero. And so that's very important because he's going to get the job done. And teams are very likely, unless he goes to a team that has an established receiving third down back, he's probably going to be a 3-down back. And especially because he's fantastic in the red zone. So teams are absolutely going to use him as the goal line back right away, which means he's going to have a ton of upside. That upside depends on what team he goes to because you can only score as many touchdowns as your offense can give you. But if he's the goal line back, he's the early down back, and he's good enough in the receiving game and in pass protection to be the 3rd down back, that's key. All 3 downs. Look at James Robinson last year. James Robinson would not have had the year that he had if they were bringing him off the field a ton because he was on the Jaguars. Okay, not a good team. But he was able to produce a high-end running back 1 season even on a bottom 5 offense because he had that secure 3-down role. He didn't have for all of the season. Like it did take an injury to Chris Thompson for him to get that completely. But he was still fantastic. And because he got that role, he was great. So that is the ultimate safety net in fantasy. It's, this team only scored 13 points this week, and they're only averaging 19 points on average. But if you're on the field a ton, you're going to get some dump-offs. You're going to have elevated touchdown chances. Your floor for yards is going to be there, and that's what you need for running back 1 production. Derrick Henry's the outlier. Like everyone wants to point out, Derrick Henry can't catch. Okay. If you're Derrick Henry, you can produce high-end seasons in fantasy by not catching the ball. But most every high-end fantasy running back needs carry and target upside to succeed. And Harris, in my opinion, maybe your opinion is different, but in my opinion, he's the most likely running back in this draft class to get that, while also being the most likely to be a first-round pick. I think that Harris and Etienne can both be first-round picks. It just depends who, let's say there's 2 or 3 teams that really want a running back in the first round. Well, okay, does one of them go after Harris or does someone else fall? Because even if teams want a running back in the first round, if other players at different positions fall, it can just be a need-based thing. They say, okay, well, we're just going to wait a little bit. Maybe they slide into the second round. That kind of hurts their potential in year one. So it's just, there's a lot of factors, again, that come after the draft that we can just analyze, and no draft capital, know which teams got them. But I think the most likely running back to get that first round draft capital is Harris. And because I also think he's the most likely to get a 3-down workload, I have him at 2. But again, they're both fantastic. At 3, we've got another Alabama player, and that's DeVonta Smith. So that makes him the 2 for wide receivers in this draft class, in my opinion. And anyone who watched the national championship game, or at least the first half of it, knows just how much upside this kid has. I mean, he was absolutely incredible in that game, and he was incredible all season. 117 receptions, 1,859 yards, 23 touchdowns across 13 games. That is an average stat line of 9 for 143 and 1.8 touchdowns. And just look at his last 3 games. Against Florida, 15 for 184 and 2. Against Notre Dame, 7 for 130 and a touchdown. Against Ohio State, 12 for 215 and 3. Ineffectively half of the game, because he got injured, a little bit after halftime. So he's got the elite production. Check that box off. He does not have a super early breakout age. That is something we would prefer, but I give him a small pass for this because he was on Alabama, and so his teammate scores going to be higher. If you guys are looking at the Dominator app, my favorite resource, playerprofiler.com. No, they don't pay me to say stuff like that. Playerprofiler.com is a fantastic resource, especially if you want a bunch of free information. But the Dominator app is also nice. We can see what players can break out. I don't think it's out yet, but just a heads up. That's a really good resource for that. But I think that he's going to have a really high teammate score. So even though his breakout age is going to be a little bit lower, that's going to somewhat make up for it. The biggest knock you're going to hear everywhere around the industry is his weight. We don't know exactly what it is, but he's definitely undersized. He's a smaller receiver, and small, speedy receivers don't exactly have the greatest track record in fantasy, even if they're taken very early in the draft. We definitely prefer bigger receivers. And like I said, he is a year older than Chase, and Chase was able to break out at an earlier age while also playing with elite wide receivers on his same team. So I am firmly on team Chase over Smith, but you need the 101 to select Chase, right? And so you still are using a top 3 pick on DeVonta Smith because he is still an incredibly talented receiver going to go early in the draft. And I don't know, I just think for many years to come, he's going to be viable in fantasy. I don't want to look too much into the weight. There are plenty of receivers who have still had successful careers that were undersized. I just am using that a little bit when comparing these two. It's just like they both have the production, earlier breakout for Chase. His body type and athleticism is just a little bit more in tune for what we're looking for wide receiver 1. And so I'm going him over Smith. At 4, we swing back over to running back, and now we have Travis Etienne. I think Etienne is the only running back that can really challenge Harris for that top spot. Maybe he balls out in the combine. Maybe Harris busts in the combine. But I don't really think there's anyone else that's in consideration for that top running back spot in this draft class. But I do have him ranked lower for a few different reasons. We know he can catch. That is not the issue. Massive target share in college, including 85 receptions over his final 2 seasons. My biggest concern right now is draft spot with Harris. Like I said, I think he can succeed on any team. I think he's got that early down workload, that goal line, and he's going to be good enough in the receiving game, pass protection to have 3-down role. With Etienne, I do think there are teams that would use him less on early downs and less at the goal line. Now, whether they should or shouldn't is a whole nother discussion, but I do believe some teams will limit that sort of workload and use him much more as only a 3rd-down back. Now, I'm not saying he's, going to be like Danny Woodhead, right? Just only going out there on 3rd downs. But I think that intentions to start midway through and a little bit to close the season is going. Let's say Swift, DeAndre Swift. To start last season, Swift was just not being used in early downs. Now, if we look at Swift compared to Etienne, I think Swift, we were pretty sure he was going to get early down workload, but then he kind of didn't. And so realize that. Sometimes we can look at players and be like, well, yeah, obviously he's going to get early down workload, and then he goes onto a team and they're using Adrian Peterson over him on early downs, and you're like, what is happening? Like, what are you looking at to where that's your thought process is coming out and saying, oh, yeah, we should use Adrian Peterson over DeAndre Swift. Like, it's just, teams just do crazy things, and I think that could absolutely happen to Etienne. A team could look at him and say, yeah, we'll give him like 3-4 carries each week, but we're going to use him much more in the receiving game. And again, in fantasy, because in Dynasty, most of you are in PPR leagues, I think pretty much all Dynasty leagues are PPR, you're like, oh, well, okay, I mean, I'm going to take the receptions anyways over the carries, but if we're nitpicking, we're saying this is still the first running back we're taking in this draft class for fantasy, I want the guy with 3 down workload, and I think Harris is much, much, much more likely to get that. Both are elite. I'm just leaning towards the one that has a more secure workload on the ground, who I also think will be used in the receiving game. So draft spot is very, very key for Etienne. Could be a gold mine if he lands on like Miami or another team that we're pretty sure is going to be willing to feature him in early downs. Now we can maybe move him over Harris. Like if he lands in Miami, yeah, I'll have a discussion over him as the number 1 guy because we've seen Miami feature running backs. And I mean, if he's going to get that early down workload and he's already so good in the receiving game, ton of upside. So you're going to hear people point out his dip in production as a big negative. I want to go over that as well because with Harris, we don't have that. With Harris, it's just like, he's just a lock to be good basically. But you're going to hear people look at his production and say, hey, there was a drop-off in his senior season. That's probably why he's going to slip in the draft a little bit. Should he slip in our fantasy drafts? So if we're looking at this dip, his sophomore and junior season were very, very close in production. 206 carries for 1,636 yards and 24.5 touchdowns on average. Really nice. Then in his senior season, only had 168 carries for 914 yards and 16 touchdowns. Now remember, most teams had a reduced season this past year. So looking at the total carries, it's like you shouldn't be doing that because the games are different. So if we look at on a per game basis, the carries were identical. So I don't want you to look at this number and say, oh, he had a dip in carries. They didn't really want to use him as much on early downs. No, he just played in a few less games. You're going to have fewer carries. He played in a few less games. But he did have a drop in his yards per carry, and people are definitely going to point to that. 8.1 yards per carry as a sophomore, 7.8 as a junior, 5.4 in his final season. So the yards dip is not entirely the games. It is that he just averaged fewer yards per carry. One thing I want to mention is yards per carry is a fairly mediocre stat. It is heavily influenced by a few long runs. It's just not the best metric to look at. And he had fewer games. And you're like, okay, but shouldn't the per carry numbers be the same? Who's to say, that he wouldn't have busted off another like 75-yard touchdown because in his sophomore and his junior season, he had a ton of long runs and he only had a few as a senior. So who's to say he doesn't just bust off, 70, 80-yard touchdown in one of these games and boost his yards per carry to like 6.5? Because like I said, it's a garbage stat. It's very heavily influenced by a few long runs. But another thing is, because of how good of a team he was on, a lot of his production that season came in bowl games and in the college playoffs, right? Because if we're adding back in the games they missed, they're not adding in playoff games, they're adding in regular season games. And those are the ones against the worst opponents. And so he has a higher share in his senior season of games against elite opponents, and the ones we removed were the not so good teams. And so who's to say that in like the 3 games I believe that they removed from their schedule, who's to say he wouldn't have averaged 7-8 yards per carry in those games, and the yards per carry would be much closer to what he was before. So I just think we're looking on a very, very small sample, and we've removed part of the sample that he was likely going to have his most success in. And so I don't think you should be looking at that at all. Another thing is the T. Higgins effect. If you followed my content last season and you've heard of this, Clemson is an elite program. They often destroy teams, and so you don't need to use Etienne when you're up big in the second half. But you do need to use him more when it's closer against tougher opponents. So you see a situation where he's used a lot in games that they're going against, the best defenses. But then if they're just destroying a team, there's no need to continue feeding him the ball. So had this been like a Madden game, well, he would have boosted his numbers, against these garbage teams, but they didn't need him. And that was what we talked about with T. Higgins last season. It was like Higgins just went off in like the first half of games, and then they're winning by so many points that they don't need to use him. And so when you look at his total numbers, you're a little bit disappointed. But had they not just killed every team, then his numbers would have been a lot better. And so I just think there are a lot of different things with Etienne that people are going to worry about that I don't think you should be worrying about. Now, again, I do have him at 2, and some people will still have him at 1. But again, I think it's the landing spot for him that's key. The final player we'll go over today is Kyle Pitts. Now, Pitts is honestly one of the best tight end prospects that we have ever seen. Incredible hands. This kid is not going to drop passes. Elite speed. And he doesn't, this is key, need to be lined up at tight end. So we see a lot of tight ends that are just never pushed out to effectively play wide receiver on different plays, right? Like they're just never out there. And that's when the most upside comes. When you can have formations, when you have a tight end on the outside lined up as a receiver, so much more upside in the receiving game. And let's just think about Travis Kelce. Having a elite tight end is such a different maker in fantasy. Like if we had gone back to Kelce's rookie season and we were looking at not only Dynasty rookie drafts, but just Dynasty startups, and you knew his career path right now, like exactly what he's done over his career. He's the 101, no questions asked. Again, not in a rookie draft his rookie year. In his rookie year, in a Dynasty startup, he'd be the 101 if you knew how he'd produced. Now, we don't know that Pitts is going to be the next Kelce. I'm not saying that. But it's in his range of outcomes easily. And the floor is very high as well. He's going to be a tight end 1 in fantasy in the very near future. And he's got a chance to break rookie records if he lands in the right spot. Now, again, rookie tight ends don't typically do much. And even if he breaks rookie records, it's not going to be that fantastic of a season. But he's the kind of player that, again, if he lands on the team that's willing to use him right away, has an elite quarterback, he could be very viable in fantasy, especially in the second half of the season when you're having championships. But again, this is Dynasty. I mean, as of right now, I have him at 5 and like the number 3, I believe, tight end in a Dynasty startup. You don't need him to be a god in year 1. But if in year 2, 3, 4, he's turning in to the next Kelce and Kittle, when those two are now retired, because remember, those guys in a few seasons, like, is Kelce going to be in the league in 3-4 years? And is Pitts going to be the new Kelce? And I mean, how many other tight ends are we really expecting to challenge him? I just think it's incredibly valuable to hit. And when I don't see another option, like, I really do think Chase, Smith, Harris, Etienne, I like those guys. I like their upside. I like their safety. After that, I think there's a gap. And I think you fill that gap with Pitts because he has the upside to be a huge difference maker every single season for a very long time. And you just cannot find that at other positions. So I think because of that value, I like having him at 5. So those are my top 5 players in Dynasty rookie drafts. Remember, if you want to see the rest of my rookie rankings, my Dynasty startup rankings, my redraft rankings, all of that is available right now on the website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. And if you sign up for a package before May 1st, use promo code FFA and you'll get 15% off. That, my friends, is the end of this one. Hope you all enjoy. If you did, then how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.